And I said, every man is a little boy inside wanting to prove that he's man enough. And he doubts it. And his whole life he's trying to prove he's man enough. He's trying to be successful in life. He's trying to make money. He's trying to achieve things so he can prove he is man enough. And the one he wants to prove to most as a child is his daddy. But then as he gets older and gets married, he wants to feel like his wife believes he's man enough. I've had men in counseling say, nobody can put me down and cut me down and just make me feel so low as my wife. Wouldn't you love that as a testimony? And I tell you, just a little cutting remark, just little finding imperfections. And we've all got them. We all struggle, but we're all wounded. And because our fathers were wounded, many times we're wounded. And unless we can break that cycle, we live our lives wondering, why am I this way? Why do I struggle? And so this morning, as you may be wondering why you have insecurities, I want us to look at three things. Number one, I want you to see the need for a blessing. A blessing is needed. We need a blessing. Then number two, very quickly, I'm going to share how to bless your children. And then number three, I want to talk about how to deal if you didn't receive a blessing. You say, Brother Carl, my dad didn't bless me. How do I deal with that? So let's look first of all at the need for blessing. Listen to what the Bible says in Ephesians 6:1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. That's a good verse. I like it when the little kids memorize that verse. For this is right. Honor thy father. I like that verse too. And mother, which is the first commandment with promise. What is the promise? You'll live longer. That just makes sense. If your daddy says don't go out and play in the street, and you don't go out and play in the street, you're probably going to live longer if you went out and played in the street. It just makes sense that if you obey your parents, you have a better chance of living longer. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. What does that mean? I believe it means don't be too tough on them. Don't get angry with them. Don't make them angry. Don't make them bitter. That doesn't mean you don't discipline. That doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. But it means you love them. And you don't provoke them to wrath. Now, in the Jewish culture, listen to me on purpose for a few minutes. I think you'll listen because you want to in a minute. In the Jewish culture, there was such a thing as giving the blessing. You remember the story of Jacob and Esau? How Jacob tricked Esau into giving him his birthright and then later his blessing. And Esau goes to Jacob, goes to his father Isaac and says, is there not another blessing for me? And he wept bitterly because there wasn't a blessing. But there was a time where the father blessed the son. By the way, the Jewish people today still do that in a ceremony. What's it called? It's called bar mitzvah. Bar means son and mitzvah means commandment, son of commandment. At the age of 13, a child, a boy, is said to now be accountable for obeying the commandments. And today, my child, you are a man. My son, you are a man. In other words, it's a transfer of blessings. And I tell you, in the Christian circles, some churches have days of blessing where they bless their son. And they'll have a dad come up and say, I want to bless my son. And they have a little ceremony and ritual. If you want to do that, that's fine. I don't know if you necessarily need a ceremony. But you do need to bless your son. And that's what a bar mitzvah. So in that culture, they blessed their son. Now, I've seen this in some fathers that I think are very good fathers. I know of a young man. He's younger than me, but he's a very wise man. He's a pastor. And we went on a trip together Me and him and another guy and his son. His son was about 9 years old, I guess. And his son was a little guy. And you know what the dad called him? Big guy. He said, "Come here, big guy." And that boy, I tell you, that boy, we were going to go hear preaching. And he was so excited. He said, "Oh, I can't wait. He's my favorite preacher." You've never seen a kid want to hear preaching as much as this kid did. And I was impressed by the way that dad built up his son. Constantly telling him, and it was amazing to see, and it was very wise. And instead of dads who are always putting down their kids, have you seen dads that are always looking for everything wrong? Well, you're always late. You're always this. You're always that. You'll never amount to anything. At my house, it was, "You're going to dig ditches for a living." Like that was the worst thing possible. If you don't do this, you're going to be digging ditches all your life. But there's a need for that child to feel accepted. Listen, this world's tough enough. Listen, this world's going to beat you down. They're going to step on you. They're going to crush you. Listen, there ought to be somebody to build you up. And dads, that is part of your job. I don't know why, but sometimes that's a hard thing to do, isn't it? It's a hard thing to say how you feel. And I'm not talking about false flattery. I'm not talking about just saying so. I'm talking about being real, the truth. But there's something about men who we don't want to share how we feel. I know I'm exactly that way. When my uncle had cancer and was about to die, my uncle was probably the most influential man in my life. My dad was not. My dad was an absentee dad. But my uncle took me fishing. I caught my first fish with my uncle. He taught me how to throw a football. We used to pitch together. I used to spend time at his house. He used to pick us up and take us to church. And when my mom told me he hadn't got long to live, and I remember at church, and I was talking to some friends of mine, and I said, "My uncle's about to die, and I want to tell him how I feel, but it's just so hard for me." You know how us guys are. We'll go, "Hey, what'd you think of the football game? Well, how's the weather?" But when it comes to talking about feelings, some of us struggle with that. Some folks don't, and if you don't, thank God you don't. But I mean, it was hard for me. I was like, I got to go tomorrow. I got to do it before he dies. And on a Monday, I went to his house and sat in his living room. And we talked a little bit about little things, and I stuttered and stammered, and I said, "You know what? I need to tell you how I feel." He said, "My journey's almost over. I ain't got much longer." And I said, "Let me tell you what I feel." And I told him. I felt so good. I was glad I did. He said, "Well, you and all your cousins and nieces, y'all brought me a lot of joy." And he died the next day. He died on a Tuesday. And I was so glad that I told him. But it was so hard for me. And I didn't know exactly why. I think I do now. But fellas, let me encourage you. Bless your children. Bless them. Tell them how you feel. Tell them today. Don't wait. I was at a funeral one time. This was back in Georgia years ago. And I went to the funeral home, and while I was there was a lady just bawling, weeping. Her brothers and sisters were sad, but not like she was. She was just bitterly crying. And she said, "Preacher, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And we went over to a corner, and she said, "My mama and I were mad. I was mad at her, and I hadn't talked to her in months. You think she knows I love her? I want her to know I love her, but I didn't tell her." Now I tell you, we ought not let people wonder about it, should we? We ought to tell them. We ought to bless them. Number 2, how do you bless your children? Now this is just some practical stuff real quick. Number 1, speak to them. Talk to them. Tell them how you feel. Some of you, maybe you need to make a phone call today. You need to tell your child how. You say, it's awkward. I know it can be. I don't know what to do with my hands. It's like when I first started dating. What do you do with your hands? You stick them in your pocket. It's just an awkward kind of thing, but you need to do it. Number 2, you can write them a letter. If you have trouble talking to them, write them a letter. And tell them how much you love them, how proud you are of them. Write them a letter. Number 3, speak highly of them when they're with other people. And I tell you this, all of us like that, but we like private praise, but also when others are around, letting people know, hey, my son, I'm proud of my son. Acknowledge what's in their heart. That means if they mess up, but they had the right motive, be glad they had the right motive. Okay, you messed up. No big deal. Everybody messes up, but you were trying to do the right thing. Acknowledge their heart. Acknowledge that they're trying to do the right thing. Number 5, reward them when they do something right. Now, I'm a firm believer. I know some people say, oh, you're bribing kids. A bribe is when you give someone something for doing wrong. A reward is when you give them something for doing right. Look all through the Bible. God rewards us. All through the Bible. Read the Sermon on the Mount. Almost every command has a reward. What does Jesus say? When men persecute you, rejoice and be exceeding glad. Why? Because great is your reward in heaven. Wanting a reward in heaven is not bad. It's not sinful. It's good. It's faith. It's saying, I believe God will bless me for doing right. That's a good thing. And I tell you, when your kids do something good, reward them. It might be just praise. It might be a gift. There's nothing wrong with that. Listen, I hear people say, oh, I wouldn't give my kids this. That's bribing them. Hey, if I want to give my grandkids something, I'll do it. If I want to give my kids something, I'll do it. When Stephen first went to church, we had a rule at our church that I think at 3 years old you could no longer go in the nursery. You had to sit in big church. So here Stephen's always been in the nursery. We brought him in church and we thought, oh man, he's going to be a mess. And really, he was crawling under the pews and everything. I was reaching for him, grabbing him, looking around, sorry, And you know what I did? I got a candy bar. I said, son, if you're good in church, you're going to get this candy bar. He started messing up in church, and I'd just lift the candy bar, let him see it, put it back down. He'd straighten up real good. You say that's bribing kids. No, that's rewarding kids for doing right. And that's what Jesus does for us, and that's what we can do. Honor your children. Have a time where you honor them, where you prefer them above others, and you treat them the way that you would want to be treated. Number 7, spend time with them. There is nothing to replace your presence. I remember hearing the story of this psychologist who was asked to come to a kindergarten class to observe one of the students. And while he was there, he noticed his son was talking to some of the other little boys. And one little boy said, my daddy's a doctor. He makes lots of money. And one little boy was saying, well, my father is a businessman and we have a nice house with a swimming pool. And he looked at his little boy, and his little boy looked up at him and said, my daddy's here. My daddy's here. There's nothing to take the place of just being there. Of being there, of watching them play ball. Watching them hit a home run. Watching them when they strike out. There's nothing to replace your presence. So how do you bless your children? With your presence. Give them some physical attention. Now, this is weird and hard for some guys. But in the Bible they hug. When the prodigal son came back, the Bible says the father fell on his neck. I wanted to wring their necks, but not fall on their necks. And the Bible talks about even kissing your father. But sometimes a touch, maybe it's a hug, Maybe it's putting your hand on their shoulder. Now, guys, especially when they get teenagers, they're like, I don't need that. Don't touch me. So what do? You just, when they walk by, you kick them in the back of the pants. That's a show of love. And if they don't behave, you kick them a little harder. Or, you might wrestle. Or, as we say down south, wrestle. Just get in the floor and wrestle. That's fun. Or get them in a headlight. Get them in a headlight and, scrape their head real good. But sometimes touching, I'm not talking about abuse. Don't go out of here and abuse and say, Brother Carl told me to. But I'm talking about an affectionate touching. But when they make a good decision, praise them. When they make a good decision. And by the way, when my kids made a bad decision and I told them, and they didn't do what I told them, I would always say, who's smarter, me or you? You are, Daddy. Who are you going to listen to next time? You, Daddy. And then they still don't listen to me. There was a man in Spain who had a falling out with his son. His son moved out and left. He hadn't talked to him in months. The father was brokenhearted. And so he put an ad in the paper and he said, Dear Paco, the son's name was Paco. He said, Paco, all is forgiven. Meet me outside of this certain hotel tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The next morning he goes down there and there was like 600 people named Paco who thought it was talking about him. There's a lot of people that are hurting. So let me go, number 3. Let me hurry. How to deal with the fact that you didn't get a blessing. You see, some of the reason we're like we are is because we didn't receive the blessing. For years I didn't realize this till I read the little book, Wild at Heart. Any of you ever read that book, Wild at Heart? I recommend it. I don't recommend all of it, but there's some basic truths that are very good. But if you didn't get a blessing, maybe you didn't have a wonderful father. Maybe you had a father that was cruel. Maybe you had a father that was mean. Or maybe you had a father that just didn't care. Maybe you had a father that was absent. And let me tell you something, that will affect you. And it will cause a cycle where you will begin to treat your children like you were treated. Most of us, that's all we know. You don't go to school and learn how to be a dad. There's no training course. You kind of pick it up and learn what you can. And well, see, I began to realize in my life, and at first I thought, well, that's not abnormal. And then I began to see that it was. And I began to see some of my fear of sharing my emotions was fear of being rejected. Because I'd been rejected as a child. But see, my dad, his parents died when he was little. His mother died when he was just real young. His daddy died when he was like 13. So my dad was wounded. He didn't have anybody that showed him love, so he didn't know how to do that. I don't remember. I tried to remember this the other day. I tried to remember a toy that my daddy bought me, and I don't remember one. My mom bought me some toys, but my dad, I don't think he ever bought me a toy. At Christmas, we'd have had no Christmas. My dad didn't care about Christmas. He didn't want to do anything Christmas. He didn't get us any presents at Christmas. If it wasn't for my mom, we wouldn't have had a Christmas. When I asked my dad, I said, Daddy, do you love me? He said, no, but your mom does. That's all you need. When I made bad grades in school and when I should have been disciplined, he was like, I didn't want to have you in the first place. She wanted you. Let her deal with it. My dad spanked me one time. He swatted me on the bottom. That's all. Otherwise, he'd say, let your mom handle it. One time my dad was laying on the couch and I went over. I was just a little boy in elementary. And I kissed him on the cheek. And it woke him up. And he said, don't you ever do that again. That's what queers do. And so I never did. Even when we were For years when we were grown, we just shook hands. That was all we did. So all of this affected me. And now I look at me and I see things that I have difficulty with and insecurities and problems. And I realize that I didn't get the blessing from my Father. So what do? Some of you may be in that same boat. You never received a blessing. As a matter of fact, you might have got the opposite. Instead of a dad that built you up, he might have put you down all the time. And so you're this little boy wanting to prove you're a man. And you've been told you're not. You'll never amount to anything. You're no good. You're going to dig ditches all your life. You're not very smart. You're lazy. You won't amount to anything. And you know what? Pretty soon, you start living that way. So what do? I had a friend of mine who had a similar type situation. As a matter of fact, he was going to be a missionary. He went to school to be a missionary, studied to be a missionary. Him and his wife got all their shots, got their passport, were ready to go. And at the last minute, she said, I can't go. I'm not going. And he came to me years ago and said, what do I do? Brother Carl, my wife won't go. I want to be a missionary. And that was 15 or so years ago, and now he's got a job here. He said, I want to be a missionary. He went to see John MacArthur and said, John MacArthur, I think I married the wrong woman. And this is something for a Calvinist to say, but he said, you probably did, but there's nothing you can do about it now. But this missionary told me, he said, my dad, you wouldn't believe some of the things he did. And he began to tell me what his dad did and how his dad talked to him and how his dad put him down and stuff I can't even share with you. And he said, Brother Carl, and by the way, this guy was so insecure. I used to tell him, I sat in Shoney's down here one day and I said, you got to go up to people, look them in the eye and shake their hand. He said he would stand in the corner. He was afraid of people. And I said, you can't be afraid of people. You're a missionary. You need to shake hands, and missionaries need to shake like this. You better learn to ask for some money or you ain't going anywhere. And missionaries do need to ask for money. I admit that. But anyway, he began to share all these things that his dad did. But then one day he read that little book. And he told me, he said, you know what I did? I drove all the way, like 600 miles, to my daddy's grave. My daddy was dead. I couldn't deal with it. But you know what I did? I went to the grave and I said, Daddy, I forgive you. I'm releasing you from this prison I've had for you because I've been bitter and I've been angry and I had you in prison because of what you did to me and what you said to me and all the hurt and all the pain for all the years, and I've held you in prison. But Daddy, I'm letting you go today. I forgive you. And he said, Brother Carl, it's helped me. It's helped me to overcome some of my fears and insecurities. And so here's what I'm saying to you. If you didn't get the blessing, make sure you forgive. Forgive your father. He was wounded too. Man, we're all struggling on this big ball. We're all having heartache and trouble and pain, and we're all cursed by sin. And so forgive. And then number 2, accept the love of your Heavenly Father. And I tell you, the older I get and the more that I go through things, the more I lean heavily on the fact that I have a Father who loves me. He loves me. Even the difficulties I have to go through because I'm on this earth, and we're all going to go through it. We're all going to have our days of trouble. We're all going to have heartaches and pain. But I'm glad I can go to my Father. When I was just a little kid, I don't know how old, but I can remember this. My mom used to rock me, and she'd sing, Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. I need thee every hour. And I tell you, this morning, I was sitting in the rocking chair on my deck, and I was singing, Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. And He will through hard times, through difficulty, through pain, through troubles. He will be your Father. And He will love you. And if I'm loved by my Father, I don't care what the world says about me. I can take the persecution. I can take the hatred. I can take just about anything if I know my Father loves me and is pleased with me. I want to please my Father. So I just want to share with you, our children need to be blessed. Bless them. How do you bless them? I just gave you a list of things that'll help you to bless them. And then if you weren't blessed, receive the blessing of God the Father. He loves you. He died for you. See, that's the thing that overcomes me. When someone says, well, why don't you retire? Why don't you give up? You're sickly. Well, there's only one problem. He died for me. I'm not going to give up on Him. He died for me. That's why I don't care how bad the economy gets, God's going to get 10% of my money. You know why? He died for me. As long as I can waddle in here and crawl in here, I'm going to come. Because He died for me. I'm not doing it for anything else. It's not about money. It's not about prestige. When I was younger, maybe so. When I was younger, maybe I wanted to have a big church and people think I'm successful. Now, I don't even care. It's for Him. It's for my Father. Before we started the church, I was laying in bed, and it's like the old devil came. And, I had people tell me, you're too old to start a church. And, what are you doing starting a church at your age? And you're not in great health. Why are you starting a church? And I was talking to the Lord, and I said, Lord, what if I fail? What if it doesn't work? What if people don't come? What if I fail? And it's like the Lord said, I'll be there with you. And we'll fail together. All that matters is that He is with me. And one day I will stand before Him. And it's going to be sooner than we think. And I long for that day. I long for it. I was looking out this morning, beautiful, beautiful blue sky. The wind was blowing, birds chirping. And I said, Lord, You made this world beautiful for me. And then I thought, how much more beautiful is the next world going to be? Just a few more days and we'll be there. I want to be with my Father. I want to live in His house. I want to tell Him I love Him. I want to sing to Him. I want to praise Him. And one day we're going to relish in the thought that you are accepted. He died for you. That's how much He loves you. He died for you. Rest in that. Rest in that fact. Let's bow for prayer.